Coming up around the nation, Jackson State wins the SWAC and marches into the Celebration Bowl. Texas Southern shocks the Florida Gators in hoops. Bowie State's greatest season comes to an end in the Division II playoffs. And the Baseball Hall of Fame calls HBCU legend Buck O'Neil to the Hall of Fame. The bus is gassed up and we're ready to roll on the road around the HBCU Sports Nation. And we're pulling out now.
Black out and move. Ride, come on. Black College, stand up. HBCU.
What's the deal, folks? It's your boy Mark Gray back at it as we hit the road around the HBCU Sports Nation for the next to final week of meaningful tackle football at America's HBCUs. Now, while it was a rough week for Bowie State, who went down to Valdosta State and found out just what it means to be in the national quarterfinals, big things were going on in Jackson. I mean, when you think about it, a sellout crowd of over 50,000 on hand watching as Coach Prime was able to deliver on his promise. And it does, in fact, speak volumes about what the commitment to athletics can mean to your university, its brand, and most importantly, to the surrounding communities. A little bit later on in this program, we're going to talk with Charles Bishop from the pregame show in Jackson. But the bottom line is Deion Sanders has had an impact that has been estimated at $185 million.
Straight cash, homie.
Through things such as corporate partnerships, deals with athletic apparel manufacturers, and there is something to be said for sharing commercial space on Championship Saturday while your game is playing with the guy who they may call the GOAT, Nick Saban, the greatest coach of all time in college football, and then you're able to weave the band into the commercial. It was just a marvelous, marvelous day for black college football and the exposure of the African-American national pastime. We'll get to the highlights of the game in just a little bit, but it can't be underscored enough how this moment in time is so transcendent. A little bit later on, we'll talk about how another one of the HBCU Blue Bloods did with the hiring practice of a coach that may damage their brand in the short term, which would not be a good look for black college football. But first, we got to take a look around at what went down all week long with the biggest headlines and the best of plays. Let's head to the Highlight Zone. Jackson, Mississippi was lit for the SWAC championship game as the Tigers, who had been waiting to hoist a championship trophy. And while the offense had sold the tickets, it was the defense who this title was built upon. The Tigers scored defensive and special teams touchdowns and rolled, knocking off Prairie View A&M. Things started on the not-so-good foot as trailing 10-2 in the second quarter, it was the special teams who put them on top. Isaiah Bolden bolting down the sidelines and taking it to the house. A 91-yard kickoff return that would set the tone for the Tigers to pull away as they cruised to a 13-10 halftime lead. Then, in the second half, the Tigers' defense was the story of the game. SWAC Newcomer of the Year and the championship game's Defensive Player of the Year, James Houston, comes through with a pick six, and he is off to the races, and the Tigers would take the lead by a touchdown and never look back. Meanwhile, a little bit later in the second half, Peyton Pickett, who has been balling over the second half of the season, bringing balance to the offensive attack, he finished with 107 yards on 19 carries, averaging just over 5.5 per rush. His 5-yard touchdown run added fuel to the fire as Jackson State began pulling away. Once again, that thing, not quite Lauryn Hill, but you know what I'm talking about. Optimus Prime, Shedeur Sanders, and Malachi Wideman connecting once again, and there she blows, boys and girls. It's a championship. Said and delivered. Coach Prime, in his first full season, brings the Eddie Robinson Trophy back to Jackson as they roll to a 27-10 victory over Prairie View A&M to claim the 2021 SWAC Football Championship. Saturday also was a historic day in the annals of Bowie State football history. For the first time, they made it as far as the quarterfinals of the national tournament, but they ran into a buzzsaw in Valdosta State. Falling by the count of 41-17 doesn't mar the fact that they finished the regular season and the season in general with a 12-2 mark. You could make a compelling argument that they really never lost to a Division II team this year. Consider the only loss during the regular season came at Division I Delaware State, and when you consider the pedigree of Valdosta State, was it really a loss to a Division II program? If Bowie State is going to take that next level step, such as the one that Winston-Salem State took in 2010 when they played in the national championship game, they've got to make the investment from the university. Damon Wilson is doing a tremendous job with a shoestring budget, but at some point you got to extend the length of the strings. If Bowie State really wants to be a national championship contender, they need to add about 5 more scholarships and probably need to be able to recruit a little bit stronger outside of the region that they're encumbered by because of the in-state tuition model. Still, it was a tremendous accomplishment for a team that represents what amounts to a basketball school in a basketball conference. But the CIAA has proven it can play football on the national level, and Bowie State has proven that they are, in fact, a national championship contender. There's no better marketing tool for a school than to be compliant. Championship level, contending team that brings students who you retain because they're enthused and have a lot of pride about their program. Let's hope that Bowie State can find the funding for the football team the way they found the funding for those glistening towers of education that are growing up all the Prince George's, Maryland County campus. Anyway, back on the other side, we have more what you came here for as we go inside the Jackson State program with Charles Bishop from the pregame show as we continue making our way around the HBCU Sports Nation.
1, 2, 3, hit it! Black out the groove. Ride, come on! Black college, stand up! HBCU!
Welcome back, folks. Charles Bishop joins us right now from with 2 E's, as in Megan Thee Stallion. So that would mean him, Charles the Tiger. Anyway, from the pregame show at Jackson State University. And I must say, Holmes, first off, congratulations to you and the rest of Tiger Nation. Hope to be kicking it with you in the ATL. You wear that championship trophy pretty well, my friend. How much fun was it to be in Jackson last weekend?
Oh, it was tremendous fun to get an opportunity to hoist that trophy and be a part of something special. Jackson State being able to win their first SWAC championship since 2007. I tell you what, Jackson, Mississippi was a buzz going into the game, and afterwards it just exploded.
Now, for those of you who are tragically uncool, that would mean that it was lit down there on Saturday night. Just want to put it out there because that's how we get down here around the HBCU Sports Nation. All right, let's go back to the game for a second. And I want to talk about how early on it seemed like the moment was a little bit much, or was Jackson a little rusty from having a week off where Prairie View came into the contest having played the week before, and they looked like they was a little bit more fluid, and then Jackson caught fire. How'd you see the way that it played out early?
It kind of played out the way it's played out literally all season, Mark. Jackson State, for whatever reason, and we can't put our finger on it for nothing, they just started out slowly on offense. The only game that I can really point to where Jackson State came out guns blazing, if you will, was the Alabama A&M game where they put 61 points up on Alabama A&M. But for whatever reason, it has just taken this offense a little bit longer to get going in the first quarter, and it's something they definitely put emphasis on week in, week out in terms of coming out, with your foot on the gas. But for whatever reason, it just hasn't happened. But what normally happens is, in some manner, the defense sets it.
And I wanted to talk about that for a second because we've kind of been caught up, even here with Optimus Prime, Shedeur Sanders, the quarterback. Some could say he should be the National Walter Payton Player of the Year. There's a whole bunch of arguments throughout the conference, and I got to be neutral on that one. But when he and Malachi Wideman come together, they just are the thing. To use it, the term that is so these days amongst the younger generation. It took a while for the thing to jump off on Saturday, but when it did, it really jumped off. Talk about the synergy that those two have been able to develop in basically, 6 months?
Yeah, I mean, Malachi Wideman, he adds another element, another dimension to this offense. He is a true big play threat, one of the top receivers in the SWAC in terms of touchdown catches, but he's so ridiculously athletic. He has a 42-inch vertical. I know Coach Wayne Brent can't wait to get him on the basketball court. He's a dual sport guy, but literally he just goes up and he makes those 50-50 balls become 80-20 balls. He's just one of those rare athletes who gives himself the best opportunity to high point the ball. And Shedeur has found a real go-to guy in finding Malachi Wideman, especially in the red zone.
But I'm talking about his ability from all over the field, though. I appreciate what you're saying about the high pointing of the ball in the red zone area, but, I mean, he is explosive. 40, 50 yards in, it's walking distance for those two. How did that come to be?
A lot of practice. You see that that they're working on that on a consistent through the course of the week. They've really found a connection, and it's one of those things where Shedeur is the type of quarterback. He really has to trust that those receivers are going the right depth or running the pattern in the right manner. And once he gains that trust that his receivers are where they're supposed to be, you see the synergy kind of take off, and it's happened with Malachi.
Charles Bishop with us from the, with two E's, pregame show at Jackson State. Tigers getting set for the Celebration Bowl. What does it mean to the Jackson State community to finally get to go to Atlanta? There are people around the country who don't understand how big this moment is. If I set the over-under at 25,000 in terms of fans making the trip from Mississippi to Atlanta for the bowl game, would you go over or under?
I would definitely go over. Number one, Jackson State is a travel fan base, and then they have a large contingent of Jackson State alumni in Atlanta. In fact, Atlanta is one of the bigger Jackson State national alumni bases. But when you take a look at it, and I say this, Mark, respectfully of other states, but Jackson State is really that proverbial home team for the city of Jackson. They don't necessarily gravitate towards Ole Miss or Mississippi State like you see in other states here in the South, where that can kind of, it can pull away from that African American community. Over here in Texas, you have UT and Texas A&M that can pull away from Texas Southern and Prairie View in terms of their fan base. Same thing happens, I believe, in Louisiana, where LSU can kind of pull away from Southern and Grambling, and definitely Alabama, where you take a look at Auburn and Alabama being able to pull away from Alabama State. But it's a unique fan base. It doesn't quite happen that way in Jackson. The Jackson State or the Jackson community continuously through the years has rallied around Jackson State football, and it becomes their pro source, if you will.
Well, there's something to be said for leading the FCS for 30 consecutive years in attendance. I mean, that just speaks volumes right there. And I'm talking about playing in big venues and the whole bit. Those of us from our community know that black college football is a lot more healthy when Jackson State is healthy and contending, and now they're flourishing. The shine has come from Coach Prime. And even before we talk about what Deion has done on the field with his team, I want to get your thoughts as a father yourself about what it was like to watch a black man like Deion Sanders away from the football field to lead his black men of the future through a moment like this that will define them for the rest of their lives.
It is really special to watch up close because you see the uniqueness of their father-son bond, especially when Deion went out with some health issues, and he's very candid in saying one of the reasons he came back is Shedeur asked for him to come back, and he, did whatever he could to get down there to the Southern game, and that was a very poignant weekend for Jackson State football. First and foremost, getting a win over Southern, who they hadn't beaten, I believe, in the last 8 or 9 years. But it was an opportunity for Coach Sanders to be down there with Shedeur and to lead them through that very hostile atmosphere. And he made a very great point that Shedeur, up until Coach Prime went out with his health issues, that's literally been his only coach. So it's been very special to watch the growth of Shedeur and Shiloh as well. They all are very funny around each other, and they just have this very unique father-son sort of thing. And it's just remarkable to watch up close. They have all these little moments where they're always joshing with each other. But, when it comes down to football, it's all business when they're on the sidelines. He'll tell you in a heartbeat, I'm Coach Prime on the sidelines, and I'm a dad away from him.
A point well taken, but you can see the familial influence. All right, to the best that you can tell, what's the one thing that South Carolina State brings to the table that would have Jackson State concerned going in? Because I'm going to set my line at 10.5 with Jackson State, a prohibitive favorite in the Celebration Bowl.
I tell anybody who's listening, those MEAC lines, they're different. Those MEAC lines are different on the offensive line and the defensive line. So I know that they're going to bring that old school MEAC physicality to this football game. And Jackson State, like they have all year, they have to match that physicality. They've been getting everybody's best punch throughout the course of the season. So these wins have not been easy. They don't, they're not automatics, but they're putting in the preparation to get ready for this South Carolina State team that they've been battle tested. They played teams like Clemson. They played some of the top teams around the SWAC. So we know without a doubt they're going to be formidable. Jackson State's going to get their best punch.
It should be an interesting week leading up to the bowl game. And how enthused are the fellas, man? I mean, you got some big-time players that went to big-time programs that wanted to play in a bowl situation. And while this may not be a Power 5 bowl, this is certainly the big show for black colleges. What's the vibe around the team about that?
They have loved it all season. And one of the themes that keeps coming up week in, week out, just get an opportunity to play in front of people that look like you and this Jackson State fan base, and to still get an opportunity to play in a bowl game. And we know John Grant, he does a tremendous job being the executive director of this Celebration Bowl with all the accoutrements that will come with this bowl game, the swag bags, the outings that they're going to have for them down there. So they're still going to get that quote unquote Power 5 experience of being in a bowl game, but you get to do it in this very familial space that we call HBCU.
It's going to be a wonderful week. Again, congratulations to everybody around there. Give Ashley Robinson, one of the great friends of HSRN and homie from back in the day, a pound from all of us up here. And we look forward to catching up with you in the ATL.
Man, looking forward to it. I can't wait to get over there.
That's Charles Bishop of the 2 E's, as in Megan Thee Stallion. Pre-game show from Jackson State University. Thanks again, my brother.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you, Mark, as always.
1, 2, 3, hit it. Black out and move. Ride, come on. Black college, stand up. HBCU.
Since the folks in the SWAC are reluctant to say it, I'll say it for them. Let's take a look at the superlatives, the outstanding performers, the guys who showed up and showed out all season long with a look at the most outstanding performers in that league. Here are this year's SWAC Players of the Year. And we will start with the Offensive Player of the Year, Alabama A&M's Aqeel Glass. 3,568 yards passing, 36 touchdowns, and a 160.8 passing efficiency. I don't know what that means, but it sounds like he was pretty darn good. He's also one of the 25 finalists for the Walter Payton Award. Florida A&M linebacker Isaiah Land was named Defensive Player of the Year. He had 19.5 sacks and 25.5 tackle for loss during the course of the regular season. And in 5 of the 10 games, believe it or not, he also had 2 or more sacks in 5 games. He was just simply a beast, forcing offenses into trouble by starting them behind the 8 ball. Jackson State's Newcomer of the Year was James Houston, a transfer, and boy did he play big. He was the most dominant defensive lineman in the SWAC. He had 14.5 sacks and 20.5 tackles for loss. This Tigers defense finished tops in the SWAC, and the Freshman of the Year, Optimus Prime. You know him as Shedeur Sanders. The Jerry Rice Award nominee completed almost 69% of his passes for just under 3,000 yards, which were both second in the SWAC. His 28 touchdowns, that too, second in the SWAC, and get this, as a freshman, only 5 picks. Unbelievable that he was able to step on the yard, lead his team to an undefeated 8-0 record, and now they're playing in their first SWAC championship game since 2013. And the apple don't fall far from the tree. Coach Prime Deion Sanders, after leading his team to a 10-1 overall record and a perfect 8-0 mark in the SWAC, is the 2021 Coach of the Year. And he's also been named a finalist for the Eddie Robinson Award. Those are your SWAC superlatives for 2021. Now, I'm sorry, folks. Everybody may accuse me of being too SWAC heavy on this particular episode of the HBCU Sports Nation, but quite frankly, these days, it is all about the SWAC. Now, anybody who knows me and has listened to me for years, my moniker has always been, once you go SWAC, you'll always come back. To the tailgating, to the battles of the bands, to the 5th quarter, to the energy that surrounds these football programs during those fall months that you don't get in any other conference around the country. Which means that when you have certain blue blood programs and they're not relevant, then you got a problem with being the super conference, which happens to be the best draw in all of FCS. That's what brings us to what may or may not be a troubling thing that if you're a member of Southern Jaguar Nation, you got to be disappointed about. I have a very reliable source who tells me that Kevin Sumlin, the former coach at Texas A&M and at the University of Arizona, was extremely interested in the program, saying, quote, my source is, that I've made enough money and I want to give something back. As my source tells me, Sumlin's family, much like the NBA's Chris Paul's family, has ties to HBCUs, to both Kentucky State and Florida A&M. But Southern chose to go in a different direction. And if you watched anything that happened at the Bayou Classic, there was definitely some game management decisions by the understudy from Dawson Odoms, and strategically, they just didn't work out. So what do? Nothing like going back to the future in order to rekindle the glory of the past. So Southern decided they would hire Eric Dooley, the best dressed coach on the SWAC media teleconference every year. But somebody needs to tell the folks at Southern that while Coach Dooley is accomplished and he has ties to the Pete Richardson era, you know, when Southern dominated the Bayou Classic, even with Eddie Robinson on the sidelines, that just because you bring an assistant from that team or that staff in, that the glory is going to come back. With all due respect to Coach Dooley, whose passion for the Southern University program goes without any reproach, would that be as good a hire as Kevin Sumlin would have been? Just think about it for a second. A guy who has recruited for Texas A&M and the University of Arizona, bringing that acumen to Baton Rouge on the other side of town, when Brian Kelly has brought energy to the LSU program, this qualifies as a head scratcher all the way around. If you had an opportunity to jump into the waters that you saw work at Jackson with a high-profile, big-name coach, why didn't you run at least that opportunity up the flagpole to, at the very least, interview the guy? Look, I know the value of Southern's football program amidst all the athletic programs in all of HBCU. And with Southern and Grambling potentially ailing, that's not a good look for the SWAC. So let's hope Grambling gets their hire right. Let's hope that this hire works out for Southern University, because Jackson has their brand. The Bayou Classic, however, remains the biggest brand in the conference. And if you want to stay on top, you gotta play like you're on top. And if what I learned to be is true, hiring Eric Dooley ahead of Kevin Sumlin is not something that's gonna get you back on top. Well, that's going to do it for this week's of the HBCU Sports Nation. Remember, subscribe and like right down here on the bottom of the page. And copy the link. Share it with your friends. Maybe 1 million and 2 million of them. Anywhere around the world. Because, you know, everybody wants to be down with the HBCU Sports Nation. Till next time, I'm Mark Gray. Deuces.
Black out the room. Bye, bye, bye.